We love manufactured housing for a bunch of different reasons. And so we wanted to just lay it out and then be able to start an educational video that caters to the younger entrepreneur or somebody that may want to be exiting from a business and deploying capital into a rental real estate play. So
maybe we start with the benefits baseline of manufactured housing.
So your hands are tied so much differently in multi. And multi is a great business. It's a higher cost on the expense load. When you look at the two side by side, you have a heavier expense load on operating apartments because of that. And so in our space, we work to get our expense ratios for properties that we've held 5+ years into the lower 30s or even into the 20% where the net operating income is the 70. And so that's a serious difference between apartments and mobile home parks.
Yeah. Also, if you have an apartment complex, all of your units are touching, right? They're literally conjoined. Occasionally, sometimes we have a resident who lights their kitchen on fire because they're cooking in oil and they left the pot on boil or whatever. And if that happens in an apartment complex, you're fixing multiple units. If something happens out of the ordinary, it's isolated one unit in manufactured housing, whereas in an apartment complex, someone starts a fire on their unit, maybe the whole community's fire system goes on and now everything's soaked. And
well, now you have to fix that building altogether, whatever that whole building, that whole section of the property. We lose probably about a home a year to, in manufactured home communities, one home a year to a fire. It doesn't typically burn the whole house down, but it catches a certain portion on fire, which kind of renders that home to us. You don't want to try to fix it unless it's minimal. And so we'll pull it and put a new home in. So you're wanting to deploy capital or you want to consider raising capital to do a deal.
Okay.
Where do you go look for a deal? I have some thoughts on how to go through this process.
This is a whole nother topic, but I feel like everyone's chasing these cap rates and they're looking for, if you start reading and doing some research on what's a good way to buy something, everyone wants these really high cap rates. And then they look in our space and they aren't really able to find them quickly, at least in the scale that they're trying to deploy. People want to go institutional. They want the 100 space community. You have to earn that, and that takes time. And if you look at the 30 to 40 space communities, there's a lot of opportunities there where you can still find those higher cap rate deals and get in the game. And over the years, we've seen a lot of guys come who want to get in the game. They come to chat with you and they don't do anything because they can't find this perfect unicorn in the countryside. And I think it's a bad forecast for yourself and it prevents you from actually drawing first blood.
I'm going to call this what makes a deal a good deal, because there's a ton of deals out there and I agree with you. And yesterday we're in a meeting and I'm like, all right, I like this, but let's scratch the word perfect. Because perfect is a horrible goal when you embark on some type of journey, whether that in this case, this is information. You're looking for a deal. You're looking for a piece of real estate that makes good financial sense. When you're first starting, you want to just be in intake and learn mode to learn every single thing about the income and the expense and what it's going to cost to manage this thing, how to do it once you get in far enough. And then where is the meat on the bone? Where is the upside? How can you make this deal good? But then I'll backtrack to another guy that I follow for good multifamily. I'll shout out Ken McElroy, and he's a big time multifamily operator. I look up to him as a good example of somebody that's done it for so long that he's just really sharp. And that's where you can't just come in and be sharp and see the perfect deal shining. You have to understand the depth of what it actually is, how much income. But first off, it's the market. What location, what market do you want to be in? And so as much as I'd hate it to go back and to paint the old rule as accurate, location is probably the most important. So you do a bunch of research and you should select your market. Ideally, you pick a market that has a decent amount of inventory so that you can, if you lean into that market and really get sharp on your research, you can find deals to look at and go through and tour and underwrite and potentially tie up, put in escrow while you go through a due diligence process. We go into the market I'd say the more growth oriented the market is with a larger population, the better, because you're just going to have more padding on everything. You're going to have contractors, you're going to have choices for vendors. You're going to have more demand for the product in general. There's just so much that goes on with a thriving economy that gives you benefits across every single piece of it. We had properties in rural country outside of Durango, and there was like one guy to do everything. So if you pissed off the plumber, good luck.
So if we're looking at baseline, what do you want in a great trailer park? Number one, you just hit it. It's location. You have to have an MSA that's going to provide vendor flow, residents, all the things that you're going to need. Another thing that I really think is important on a first deal is really focus on utilities and getting a deal that has city services
and decent serviceable electrical, where it's not just tunneled everywhere and old. And in Arizona, they literally bury electrical cords. They're wires, they're electrical wiring. But nowadays you put it in conduit. Back in those days, they literally just dug trenches and dropped rubber insulated wire in the ground. And so like those things you learn, and we've learned the hard way by bumping into things that cost a lot more than you'd ever anticipate. And yeah, like the location, because the top line, if you're going to break it down like 1, 2, 3, you got to have demand for the product. So like somebody recently showed me a deal, and I try to help anybody that wants to get in the space, and I'll give them a couple of pointers. Then it's like rural San Diego, and it's don't start there. If you get real sharp when you understand this town and it's about to boom because of X, okay, but that's still speculative. So you got to take it back. Where's your demand base for this housing? And so the more diverse the pool of people that are going to come in and need affordable housing in manufactured home communities specifically, the better off you are. And the more rent that you're going to be able to charge in the long haul, your rate is going to continue to grow. And therefore your top line and your gross income is going to continue to grow. So our top performing assets have been newer builds. So like the utilities and those types of things aren't beating you up on the expense side, and they're in good locations. So you have consistent demand. Your rental rates can climb consistently. Doesn't have to be home run, because time heals all wounds. You can start to grow and income after 5 to 10 years at let's say 4 to 5% bumps. In 10 years, that's 50% more income. And then if you're able to manage your expenses really well, that deal's worth a ton more, at least double, if not triple the value than when you bought it. So you drive top line demand, top line income. So you need a good location. Then you minimize expenses. And that's important to have a pretty deep vendor base. Nobody likes to work in mobile home parks. That's just like a kind of something nobody really talks about.
Yeah.
You really have to build good relationships with vendors in mobile home parks, because right now, good vendors, good electricians, plumbers, you name it, they're busy enough with other work, and they can cherry pick what types of properties they want to work on. So you need the more people, the better, in my opinion, in a big demographic, a big metropolitan location, 1 million plus. We have a bunch of stuff in Tucson. We're going to do really well with it because of how we bought it, but it's way more, I'd say, difficult to hit huge gains in the markets that only have a $500,000 to $1 million, because you just have different dynamics in the drivers of that economy. Where Phoenix, Dallas, Houston, all these big markets, even if they have some different risks, each market's going to have its own risk. But the more people, the merrier, because you're going to have so many more options, and you can continue to drive long-term revenue, and it's going to grow. And so then you get into, I'd say the third piece is the debt. And so who is a lender for that property? So like my lender, the first thing you do from his perspective is type in FEMA and he looks up the flood map and sees if the property is in flood, because that impacts who is a viable lender for that property. And it limits who potentially, if it's in flood, it limits who that lender is going to be. So then that limits your exit. So that impacts even if you hold it for 10 years, that impacts the buyer coming in. You're always going to have this, I don't want to call it like a salvage title car, because it's not quite that bad, but it's like a car that's been dinged and repaired. It's in flood. It's going to hurt our loan spread. It's only going to give us, it's probably like 50% of the options from a loan perspective. So your long-term growth is going to have a harder time on the exit. So you want to look at flood, look at your loan options. Ideally, like how we do it now is if a mobile home park does not qualify for Fannie Freddie, call it the agencies, for a non-recourse loan, whether or not we choose to take that loan option is secondary. If it will quickly qualify for an agency loan, Fannie and Freddie, because the flood impacts that, only one of them will do flood. And so you look at the loan options, and if they'll do it, that means that property is in a location that globally is going to be successful. The credit risk from their standpoint, the lender is not as concerned about the long-term performance of that asset, to where it gives you like a quick way to measure the long-term viability of an asset. So if the agencies are like, oh no, quality, size, let's say it's most of the time your lenders, you can lean on them to do $1 million loan amount minimum. That's pretty low. Most lenders don't want to spend the time on it, but if you get into the right mortgage broker, they'll do $1 million to $1.5 million agency loan. And so you buy a deal that's just over that threshold to start, ideally, and or you buy a deal that will grow in value, but the agencies like it, it's just too small right now. So you can do that. You can do the same third-party reports to qualify the lender, or that the agencies use to go through the process. And you can basically prove that deal to be long-term viable for an agency loan, which is the best non-recourse fixed rate product that's out there. For the most markets, they win and they do the most business.
So hold on. Let's
went on a mortgage rant, but I was firing.
There's just so much, man. So it's sure talking about it's like we have a lot of firsthand experience and pain that comes from this time. Let's paint the picture of who this consumer is. So either it's somebody who has $1 million liquid, or it's somebody who's in the rat race and they want to start making some cash flow and do it through some sweat equity. So at the very entry kind of level.
Yep.
And so that person, what are they looking for? So we've already established that you have to find a good MSA. Well, if you were just starting today, you would totally buy a non-agency deal in Tucson.
Yeah, but I think that a really important point is to look at the long-term viability of that asset to the agency qualifications.
Okay.
All right. If you're enjoying this content, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, and check out the description below for our websites listed. Thanks a lot for joining.